It's time for another episode of Saturdays with Seniors here on KC 101, brought to you by Hemingway General Contractor. Your air conditioner will be in use in the coming weeks, and if you haven't serviced or cleaned it, it's not going to run efficiently. Have Hemingway's clean your air conditioning system. Plus, if you have a Luxair AC system, no matter who installed it, Hemingway's can help maintain your warranty. Since your AC will be in use, your furnace won't. Get it serviced now or look into a new Luxair furnace. The Hemingways are our local factory-authorized Luxair dealer for furnaces and AC units, and they include a 10-year parts and labor warranty in your package for free. I'm Jason, your host this week, and today we've got Ed Heyler with us. Good morning. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good. And how old are you, Ed?
I'm 97.
You're 97, and we are at your house today, and you have been quite a distinguished farmer.
Oh, I work at it.
I mean, that's all you can do. But we'll talk a little bit about that a little later on in the segment. But I want to go way, way back. Tell me, where were you born, Ed?
I was born in Nauvoo, Pennsylvania. That's a little town between Morris and Liberty.
Yep, I know where it is. And were you born in a house?
I was born at home on the farm.
So the doctor come to you then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
What did your parents do for a living?
My dad was a farmer all his life. He was born and raised on the farm, and when he passed away, that's where he was, on the farm. My mother came from down Saldysburg way.
Okay, yeah.
Down towards Jersey Shore.
Yep.
She moved up with a neighboring family to help out with them, and they got together and were married and had a successful business and a good life and raised a good family.
Well, that's great. Tell me about your schooling. Where did you go to school?
I started out in a one-room school. We walked about 3/4 of a mile to school, and there were all 8 grades there. And when I got to 8th grade, the Link family donated money to build a 2-room school much closer. And then when it come to high school, I went to Liberty. Morris only had a 2-year high school, and I wanted to go to Liberty because they had a 4-year high school, and they also had a vocational ag program, which I enrolled in.
So you've always been interested in agriculture
Yes,
your whole life?
I'm afraid so.
There's nothing wrong with that. Well, let's talk a little bit about your schooling. What happened to the kids when they got into trouble?
I don't really remember that a lot of kids got into trouble. When I graduated from high school, there was only 21 in my graduating class. So when the school is smaller like that, I don't think you have near the problems.
Right.
And it was also wartime, and the people knew that, hey, as soon as we get out of high school, we either get a job which will get you deferred or you're going to go in the service.
Oh, right, absolutely. Now, did you ever spend any time in the service?
Yes, I spent about 2 years in service.
And what branch were you in?
I was in the Air Force. I went directly from high school. My oldest brother already had a deferment for the farm because they needed the foodstuffs. Mm-hmm. And so there was no chance of my getting it deferred, so I enlisted in the Air Force. I never left the States. It was late in the conduct of the war, so I went from one training base to another, ended up in Texas training on B-29s. And the armistice was signed, and so they came to all of us who were in training. There probably was close to 1,000 there, I don't know. But anyway, they said, the war is over. If you want to finish your training, you got to sign up for at least 3 years of service. Otherwise, we stop training today, and eventually we'll muster you out and you go home. As I recall, in our class, there was about 200. One fellow stayed in, and everybody else elected to go home.
That sounds about right. Well, let's go back to the house that you grew up in. Did your farm have running water and electricity, or?
Yes, we had indoor plumbing, running water. We got electric when I was probably a freshman in high school. Before that, we had all kerosene lamps and lanterns in the barn.
Yep. And a lot of people nowadays obviously don't realize, but farming was a lot harder back then than it is now, because you've got the machinery and stuff now, but back then you did everything by hand.
That's right.
Now, what kind of farm was it? Was it a dairy farm? Or?
It was a dairy farm.
So you had to milk all the cows by hand?
All the cows by hand. We had 15 cows, which at that time was considered a big dairy. Mm-hmm. And today, that hardly gets your foot in the dairy.
That's right. Yeah, for sure. Well, let's move ahead a little bit. Do you remember your first car?
The first car I got, probably a year or two after service, was a second-hand Packard Coupe, and I ran that for probably 3-4 years.
Do you remember what you paid for it?
I'm going to guess $300, but I'm not real sure anymore.
You can't buy a car for that anymore.
I do remember used to get gas for 5 or 6 gallons for $1.
Those days are gone too.
Yes. And I did not have a car when I come home from service, so if I wanted to go see somebody, I had to borrow Dad's car. And if you wanted to buy gas, you had to have a ration stamp. And we did have a blacksmith shop that he also ran a gas pump. And boys who were home from service, if they needed to go someplace and did not have a stamp, he would spot them to 5 gallons of gas.
Now, do you remember rationing anything else?
Sugar was rationed. I presume meat was, but living on the farm, we grew our own, yep. So I don't know. But sugar was rationed, yes. There probably were some others. I was not interested in housekeeping at that time.
Sure.
I had other interests.
Sure. Well, what did you do for fun growing up? I mean, you worked on the farm a lot, I'm sure, so
right.
You probably didn't have a lot of free time. But in your free time, what did you do?
Hiked up in the woods, up on the hills a lot. We had a very active church with a young people's group, and in the summertime we'd get together and play softball frequently. Mm-hmm. And once in a while we'd go to the movies, but we didn't travel then like we do today.
Right.
When I went in service directly out of high school, I had been to Williamsport probably half a dozen times and to Wellsboro a dozen times, and that was about the extent of my traveling.
Right.
So when I went in service, 2 weeks after I was in, I ended up in a basic camp in Florida. I was kind of a homesick kid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, traveling back then, a lot different than it was today. It took a lot longer to get to places. Like to Williamsport, to Wellsboro, it took at least twice as long, maybe even longer. Now, you said that you did go to the movies. What movie theater did you go to when you did go to the movies?
The one in Wellsboro.
The Arcadia?
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Yep.
Do you remember any of the movies you saw there?
No.
Okay. Now, back then, how did you get your news? I'm assuming you didn't have a TV till way later, but newspaper probably, radio?
Newspaper and radio. We had a daily paper out of Williamsport, and we had a radio which, up until we got electric, was powered with a battery. Mm-hmm. And you'd have to charge that battery up or get a new one every so often. So we didn't watch it 24 hours. We picked our programs and watched it and then turned it off.
Right, yep. So when your parents had to go shopping, how often did they do that and where did they go?
Believe it or not, my mother did not shop a lot for groceries. My dad had a route in Williamsport. Every 2 weeks he would go down with whatever produce we had, and he had certain places which would wait for him. And in season, there would be potatoes, apples, maple products, which we had a sugar bush. We did not raise a lot of extra vegetables. And eggs, we sold a lot of eggs down there. Once in a while, they would ask for a live hen. In those days, they would butcher it. Today, no one remembers how anymore. And so he would go down, and my mother would give him a list of what she needed. And they would bring home those groceries, and those groceries would last at least 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. She didn't go down to the store every other day and say, I need a loaf of bread. She baked her own bread, did all of her own baking and all of her own canning, and pretty self-sufficient. But she bought staples like flour and sugar. Mm-hmm. And in fact, for a while, we even produced some of our own flour. We raised wheat, so we'd bag it up, take it to a mill in Saldysburg, and they would grind it and make it into flour. And while they were doing that, we would go 5 miles out a little place called Mud Run and visit her parents. And then late in the afternoon, we'd come back, pick what was wheat but was now flour, and we'd do enough of that to last at least a year.
Wow. That's almost unheard of now, too. So
Yes.
So let's talk about your first job. Do you remember what your first job was?
When I got out of service, I wasn't real sure what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to farm. It's what I'd been brought up to. But while I was looking around for a place, a buddy of mine, we cut logs one winter, And then I got a job in the glass works in Wellsboro. I worked there for probably close to a year, and I was still looking for a farm. My girlfriend, who later married, said to me, "Why are you looking for a farm when you've got a free education?" Well, I said, "Because I like to farm." She says, "You've got a free education under the GI Bill, so why don't you take advantage of that? And then you can farm if you want to." So she talked me into it. I did tell her, I said, "I'm tired of being in service and not knowing any real close friends." So I said, "If I go to college, you're going with me." So we got married, went to Penn State under the GI Bill. I took ag education because I figured I'm going to get a lot of knowledge in agriculture. If I want to teach, I can. If I want to, I can go back on a farm. After 3.5 years at Penn State, I applied for a job at Westfield, Kawanesky Valley High School, and I got that job, and it's the only job I ever had. I did my 35 years there, retired. I had bought a farm in the meantime, so I was teaching and farming. And I'm still farming today, but not as hard.
Well, yes, I recently saw that you got an award for farming.
Yes, that was a Farm Bureau Award. For outstanding service to agriculture. And it was based on more than just ag. As I told him when I was given the award, there are 3 things probably that affected my life. Not talking about people now, just events or happenings. One is agriculture, one is education, and the other one is religion. And I've made use of all of them. I taught ag, I have farmed, so I've taught students how to farm, and a minister talked me into doing some lay speaking, and so for about 50 years I've been filling the pulpit up and down the valley here from time to time. And that's been a very rewarding occupation.
Well, when you were actively farming and teaching, can you tell me how a typical day would go? Because you'd have to get up super early, I'm sure.
Well, I didn't have a dairy because that didn't work out well, but I'd get up at 5:30 or 6 in the morning, do some chores. Late in the teaching career, we had beef cattle, but early on we had poultry. We had about 2,000 laying hens, and they more or less take care of themselves if you have the feeders full and the water is full. And my wife would gather eggs, and then we'd pack the eggs and ship them out. And after I'd get in, have breakfast, clean up, get ready, and go to school. Be home about 4 o'clock and do chores. And if it was a time in the summer when we were planting crops or harvesting, we'd work sometimes late at night, and next day we'd start and do it all over again.
Yeah.
And we had 5 children, and they all learned that they had jobs when they were growing up. I don't believe in a lot of heavy child labor, but there's some responsibilities are good.
And I think a lot of kids these days miss out on that. A lot of kids now, they don't do chores. They don't have responsibilities like people growing up during the time that you grew up.
That's right.
Well, we're going to jump back a little bit. Tell me about some of the chores you had when you were growing up on the farm with your parents.
When you grow up on a farm, you do the little light chores when you're young, and then as you get older, you can do the heavy ones. I can remember when I was probably 10, 12 years old, and we'd be making hay in the summertime. Now, I had 2 older brothers, and so we'd go out and had an aunt who lived with us. She would rake the hay after my dad mowed it. We didn't have a hay loader at first. We pitched it all on by hand. I would open the windrows so they could drive through with a team and a hay wagon, and one older brother would load, and the oldest brother and my dad would pitch it on. So we'd fill the barn with hay with just that crew. At the time, we thought, boy, this is heavy, hard work, but you look back on it and you thought, well, that wasn't so bad after all, and it was quite an experience.
So fast forward a little bit. You grew up in Nauvoo, but you ended up in Westfield. What year did you end up in Westfield?
I moved here in January of 1950.
Is that the same year you started teaching?
That's right.
Okay.
I graduated from Penn State in the middle of the year because I had gone summers some. So when I graduated, they needed a teacher in January, so it worked out. I needed the job, and they needed a teacher, and we've been here ever since. When I had put my time in, I had a few health issues. I retired, and they hired my youngest son, Martin, who taught for 35 years, and now he's retiring.
Oh, wow. So you said you taught for 35 years and you were the ag teacher?
Yes.
Okay.
From 50 to 70, it was a one-teacher department. And in 1970, we had enough students that we hired a second teacher. And so from 1970 to the present, there's been a two-teacher department.
Can you tell me a little bit about some of the businesses that are no longer in Westfield? Westfield has definitely changed, I'm sure, since you grew up.
Oh, yes. Actually, there's probably only two businesses that I can think of that are here now that were not there. One of them is McKnight's Agway, and the other one is the post office. But other than that, there were two grocery stores on Main Street. They're both gone. I have a grocery store, Tops, and we also have a couple of dollar stores, which are relatively new to the area. We had a gas company, which had an office right in town. You went there and paid your gas bill. They have now moved out of town, and you pay your gas bill online or by mail, whichever you wish. We had two railroads when we moved here, and it soon went down to one. And after a flood of 72, I believe 72 or 75, the track had washed out in places, so they never put it back. So we've been without rail service since the 1970s.
Do you remember much of the Westfield Tannery?
Yes, that was a very active tannery, and a lot of them worked in the tannery, farmed a small farm with maybe 6-8 head of dairy cows. And I don't remember just when that went out. That's been gone quite a while now, but that was a big boon to the town. Even during the Depression, they had jobs. The pay might not have been the best, but it kept a lot of people busy.
And you had mentioned the flood of 72. Do you remember much of the flood of 72? How did that affect Westfield?
It caused a lot of damage. It wiped the railroads out in places. It wiped the road out and had to be repaired. And there was a lot of damage. I don't know of any houses that were swept away, but a lot of them had water in the cellar and lost their heating appliances and things like that. But they survived.
Yep. So you said you were married. How long were you married to your wife?
I was married for 73 and a half years.
Wow.
I credit my wife, Dorna, for if I had success, a lot of it was dependent on her.
She's what really drove you. She was your drive to do your farming and get you through your life there.
Whatever I decided I wanted to do, we'd talk it over together, and if it looked feasible, we'd do it, and she'd be behind me 100%.
That's great. A lot of people are missing out on that, too. So.
Yes.
And you said you had 5 kids?
Yes.
And are they still all with us? Or
No. One boy passed away about 10 years ago, but there are 4 other ones, and they've all done well. One is a teacher. One was a mechanic and passed away. Dick was a teacher. Marty's a teacher. So the 3 boys that are left are all teachers. 2 of them are retired, maybe 3, I'm not sure. It's getting close. And our youngest daughter was a nurse in Rochester, New York at Strong Memorial Hospital. So they've all done well.
Excellent. Grandkids, I'm sure?
I've lost track. And great grandkids.
Yep. Well, Ed, we're going to wrap it up here soon. But do you have anything else that you'd like to share? Any words of wisdom?
All I can say is we've had a good life. It's been a good run. As I told them when I got the award in Hershey, I'm going to keep on farming as long as I can. I don't know if it'll be a week, a year, or what. I got a pacemaker a while ago, and once a year they check it, and they checked it here a little while ago. I've got 6 years left. I'd like to use every one of them up.
And I hope you do. You seem to be in great health. And one more question before we wrap it up. If you could grow up back when you did or grow up today, which one would you pick?
I'd do it all over again, just like I did.
Same way you did, yep. Every person that we've talked to has said the same thing. So
every once in a while someone says, well, you seem to like to do your preaching. Would you like to have been a preacher? It would have been all right, but... You know, I think I affected the lives of just as many by teaching or by teaching and preaching as if I'd have been all my life in the pulpit. Because the way you live your life affects the way people look at you as much as what you say.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thanks for being a guest on Saturdays with Seniors. We do this every Saturday here on KC 101, 10 o'clock. It's brought to you by Hemingway General Contractor. For heating or air conditioning installation or service, call or text Alan or Brian at Hemingway, 662-6997. Ask about Luxair, the financing options, and the rebates for veterans and most emergency service personnel. Hemingway General Contractor, 662-6997. If you missed any of this episode or any of our previous episodes, you can go to our website, kc101fm.com. There's a link to our YouTube channel, and all you got to do is click that, and it'll take you to all of the episodes. And I want to thank you one more time.
You're welcome.